They thought it was a formality. Another vote, another annexation. A backwater species on an underdeveloped blue rock wouldn't matter in the grand architecture of the galactic order. Earth, after all, had only just qualified for observer status in the conclave. No cultural exports, no meaningful diplomacy, no military worth noting. Just noise, posturing, and primitive ambition. The vote passed with a casual majority. 1,212 in favor, 29 against, and 9 abstentions. The Vocari Imperium called it a preventive stabilization measure. That sounded better than unilateral occupation. They expected resistance, yes, but nothing meaningful. The kind of resistance that made for good media coverage, primitives protesting in unison, igniting minor skirmishes before surrendering in exhausted silence. Earth would follow the same script, they thought. Collapse economically, plead for trade resumption, and accept oversight under the Vocari's Interplanetary Governance Charter. That was the plan. Painless. Polished. Procedural. They underestimated one detail. Humanity had been watching. Quietly. Closely. And not through diplomatic channels or ambassadorial envoys. No. Through data scraping, infiltration, black-boxed observers hidden in the tech they bought, traded, and reverse-engineered. They knew the conclave. And worse, they understood it. The Vocari expected Earth to argue. Earth said nothing. No transmission of objection. No declaration of sovereignty. Just silence. The kind that grows under tension, not compliance. Alien analysts flagged it as an anomaly, but the fleet still deployed. Standard operating pattern, orbit lockdown, establish no-fly zones, disrupt communication infrastructure. First probes were sent to scan Earth's orbital grid. 2 failed to return data. 1 sent back corrupted telemetry and then burned out, software melted from an unknown feedback loop. Internal reports mentioned hostile interference. Command dismissed it as outdated human hardware reacting unpredictably. That was the first mistake. Interference wasn't unpredictable. It was precise. Global networks on Earth dimmed. Satellites blinked out in coordinated patterns. Telecom blackouts rolled out in geographic spirals. Not chaotic. Patterned. As if a signal had moved across continents, shutting systems down in sequence. Vocari analysts noticed encrypted bursts originating from deep-sea locations, impossible transmission points. The encryption itself was new. Human-made, but unreadable. Even their best AI-assisted decryption algorithms couldn't penetrate it. Earth's digital veil closed tight. Vocari High Command suggested applying pressure. A warning shot. A targeted orbital disruption strike on a satellite relay cluster. Within 12 hours, the fleet's second-tier scout ship was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. No explosion, no debris. Just off the grid. One moment it was transmitting diagnostics. The next, it wasn't. They blamed a drive malfunction. The crew was marked as missing. Families were informed with scripted condolences. Officially, the operation continued. Back on Earth, no riots. No protests. No take me to your leader. Cities operated under internal blackout drills. No outward panic, no outward anything. Vocari psychological warfare officers were baffled. Where were the street mobs? The desperation? The human fear? Surveillance images, taken by stealth orbitals, showed tightly coordinated movement of vehicles, closed military convoys, non-public aircraft taking off and landing in rapid intervals. Something was moving. Preparing. Meanwhile, human embassies on other planets went dark. The diplomats left their posts, data nodes fried clean. No one had seen a species retreat from the galactic table with such deliberate silence. It wasn't submission. It was withdrawal. Strategic. Methodical. Calculated. For the first time in centuries, the conclave's peacekeepers were on edge. Earth wasn't acting irrationally. It wasn't resisting violently. It simply closed the door and locked it from the inside. A Vocari fleet officer, Commander Levick, filed a concern memo to Central Command. He wrote, "The humans are not behaving within known psychological or military parameters. This is either a failure in profiling, or something else entirely. Recommend reassessment of Cultural Threat Index. His report was buried. Command didn't like disruptive noise during an operation, especially not from mid-level officers with battlefield nerves. Meanwhile, human satellites began reappearing. Not in orbit, above orbit. Higher than standard placement. No heat signatures. No solar panels. They weren't satellites in the traditional sense. They were something else. Objects with no propulsion trails. Still. Watching. Silent. When a Volcari drone approached one, it disintegrated without impact. Every nanosecond of data from the drone's black box showed nothing. One moment it was operational. The next, it wasn't. Not destroyed. Unwritten. The Conclave's Central Intelligence attempted an audit of humanity's global data. All attempts failed. Earth had vanished digitally. No open channels, no financial flows, no media leaks. No digital profile remained. 192 human data brokers, previously tapped by alien corporate entities, simply ceased operation. Internal financial systems went black. Earth's economy didn't collapse. It went invisible. Every algorithm tracking trade, logistics, and defense procurement spat errors. A galactic broadcast was sent. Official Conclave communique. Declaration of peacekeeping intentions, explanation of defensive actions, and call for Earth to accept oversight. It was transmitted in all known human-compatible languages. It received no response. Earth didn't even acknowledge receipt. And then, something happened that hadn't occurred in 1,000 years. A message, unrouted, protocol-agnostic, and untraceable, appeared across 1,000 Conclave data servers, simultaneously. Simple. Unambiguous. Declaration acknowledged. Threat accepted. No call for negotiation. No threat of retaliation. Just a statement. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Acknowledging terms. Accepting the fight. For the first time, the Volcari Imperium questioned whether their assumptions were wrong. Whether humanity had played its role perfectly. Not because it didn't know better, but because it did. Because they understood that silence, when used well, isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's the drawing of breath before a storm. And that storm had now been invited. Congratulations. You just declared war on the galaxy's deadliest species. They expected a reply. A demand for negotiations, a plea for leniency, perhaps even the formation of a human delegation seeking compromise. What they got was silence. That silence wasn't interpreted as defiance at first, it was seen as hesitation. But days passed. Then weeks. The usual playbook, fear, resistance, surrender, none of it applied. Earth simply remained still. No panic. No uprising. No contact. The Volcari analysts were baffled. The humans had seen an entire fleet enter their orbit and deploy a blockade. Any other species would have tried to communicate, to make sense of it. But Earth gave nothing. Not one frequency ping. Not one political overture. Just quiet. Alien analysts tasked with decoding Earth's response began to panic. Psychological models had failed. Predictive behavior matrices returned inconsistent outputs. Humans weren't following any of the expected crisis trajectories. More concerningly, data patterns on Earth showed signs of something else, preparation. Not in the traditional military sense. Something more distributed. Infrastructure that had been dormant suddenly began to activate. Underground servers, deep-sea communication cables, dormant power grids, all synchronized into alignment. And still, not a single broadcast. No slogans. No calls for arms. No show of nationalism. Just global, silent coordination. The Volcari called it collective madness. Others began to suspect it was discipline. One alien sociologist wrote in a report, "We assumed humanity would scream when struck. They did not. They looked us in the eye and closed the door. That's not fear. That's intent." That report was buried before it could reach Conclave Command. Recon units deployed to monitor human activity began reporting strange anomalies. Orbital scans picked up energy readings from beneath Antarctica, something massive powering up. Seismic disturbances didn't match natural tectonic behavior. Subterranean movement was calculated and measured. Then came the digital shift. Global internet traffic from Earth dropped to nearly zero. Not reduced, eliminated. Not even local transmissions. It was as if Earth had gone dark. But satellites showed no blackout. Cities were lit. Vehicles moved. Planes flew. Civilization was active, yet invisible. Vocari data extraction protocols couldn't penetrate Earth systems. Every attempt was intercepted, redirected, or simply collapsed. One AI monitoring probe attempted a brute force penetration of a low-tier comms relay. It was fried within seconds. Diagnostics revealed a traceback loop had been embedded in the human response, so advanced it had infected the Vocari's internal systems before they could isolate the breach. An act of cyber warfare without a declaration. It wasn't just defense. It was a test. And Earth passed. Command grew agitated. No visible military deployments. No resistance fleets. No response. They concluded humanity lacked the capacity to engage. They were wrong. 1 week later, the Vocari fleet's third command vessel lost all communication. Its systems had gone completely offline, its navigation corrupted. Pilots reported instruments malfunctioning, atmosphere controls fluctuating, and internal doors locking. By the time a recovery drone reached the ship, every crew member was unconscious, but unharmed. No damage to the hull. No signs of boarding. The only recorded anomaly was a single word etched onto every wall, in every language stored within the ship's databanks, observed. That incident triggered alarm across the entire fleet. Command downplayed it, calling it a rogue infiltration. But fear spread. A species capable of disabling a command vessel without force had capabilities far beyond what was accounted for. Still, no retaliation order was issued. Earth hadn't attacked. Not conventionally. And the Conclave didn't know how to respond to war without explosions. Alien media networks began spinning the events. Human provocation threatens Conclave peace. Earth refuses to acknowledge galactic order. But behind closed doors, military advisors across multiple species were reclassifying humanity's threat level. One faction proposed preemptive orbital strikes on suspected weapons facilities. Another argued for economic embargoes. Neither option seemed reliable. Every economic vector had been shut down. Human assets off-world had liquidated holdings days before the vote. Earth had predicted the exact timeline of the invasion and prepared accordingly. No panic. Just execution. One intercepted fragment from a human data burst, decrypted at extreme cost, simply read, "We anticipated betrayal." That chilled every analyst who read it. Then came the second disappearance. A stealth scout vessel, cloaked with the most advanced Vocari invisibility mesh, sent out one last signal, engaging passive scan on Earth's thermospheric, and then nothing. The signal cut off mid-transmission. Every emergency protocol failed. Tracking systems showed the vessel had not been destroyed, it had been redirected. Somehow, human systems had hijacked the navigation of a cloaked, silent ship in high orbit. Without engaging propulsion. Without making a sound. Aliens began whispering the term, Ghost War. A conflict with no battlefield, no declaration, and no end. Just pieces disappearing one by one. Messages encoded in silence. Power wielded in absence. The more they tried to understand humanity, the less sense it made. The human threat matrix was rewritten again. This time, it was flagged not by the military, but by the galactic scientific community. The conclusion was simple: human unpredictability is not random. It is strategic. Another analyst proposed that humanity had never intended to fight with fleets. They had been studying the galaxy for decades. Analyzing structure, hierarchy, military doctrine, and worst of all, patterned arrogance. The kind of confidence only ancient empires had. Humanity had watched and waited. Not because they were weak. Because they were cataloging everything they would need to win. Still, there were no official casualties. No confirmed engagements. Just the disappearance of assets, the breakdown of signals, and the overwhelming sense that every move the Conclave made had already been anticipated. Earth still hadn't fired a shot. And yet, every fleet commander now kept one hand near the emergency jump protocol. The silence wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was patience. The Volcari finally admitted what their ego wouldn't let them say aloud. Earth wasn't refusing to fight. It was already fighting. And the first stage of war wasn't destruction. It was erasure. They hadn't heard a declaration. They hadn't seen a counterstrike. What they didn't realize was that humanity never plays by the rules of the first strike. They simply decide when the war has already begun. And for Earth, it had started the moment they were underestimated. The fleet advanced, fully armed and unchallenged. Over 300 vessels surrounded Earth, their formations precise, weapon systems live, drones deployed across orbital grids. They had been told Earth was unpredictable, but nothing had happened for weeks. No visible resistance. No transmissions. Just that same silence. It bred overconfidence. The Volcari Imperium declared Phase 2, ground presence. Drop units were cleared to establish footholds in select regions. No opposition was expected. Within minutes of entry, everything changed. The first descent ship reported interference. Not jamming, disruption at the neurological level. Pilots reported phantom inputs, guidance systems twisting mid-drop. Then, the entire unit vanished from sensors. 10 seconds later, the fleet's battle net lit up with a flood of data, telemetry showing the descent ships twisted in midair, pulled off trajectory, and disassembled mid-fall. Not shot down. Taken apart. No explosions. No energy readings. No debris. Another wave followed. Heavier armor. Countermeasures. This time, visual contact confirmed what no one expected. The atmosphere itself bent around the craft. Hulls dented inward without impact. Engines powered off in flight. Survivors described a hum subsonic, penetrating the cockpit walls. They blacked out mid-descent. Recovery drones found them hours later, scattered in perfect circular patterns. Uninjured. Uniforms intact. Weapon systems disabled. All organic power sources drained to zero. The fleet commanders finally acknowledged that something was very wrong. Human tech wasn't visible. It wasn't even alien. It was absent. Unseen. Every drone sent to scout Earth's surface encountered distortion fields, optical refraction, temporal feedback, memory lapses in observation logs. It wasn't cloaking. It was perception denial. Earth had built defenses not to fight the fleet, but to erase its ability to perceive threats. Then, the first casualty. A Volcari cruiser in low orbit was hit. No energy readings, no visual confirmation, but its internal structure imploded in a cascading failure. Hull integrity was lost from the inside out. The command crew transmitted emergency logs. 1 second normal operation. The next, systems froze, oxygen scrubbers spiked, internal doors sealed. Every crew member died of decompression in sealed rooms. The ship cracked open 30 seconds later. Not from weapons fire. From systemic collapse. The black box was recovered. One line of corrupted code appeared in every subroutine. Trial complete. Panic spread. This wasn't war. It was dissection. The Volcari responded by deploying a series of automated defense drones designed to detect kinetic anomalies. They vanished the moment they entered Earth's atmospheric threshold. Not shot. Not destroyed. Simply removed. Some believed Earth was using a space-time folding technique. Others claimed advanced AI was manipulating battlefield probability in real time. But no theory matched the data. Nothing did. Then came the broadcast. Not from Earth. From their own fleet. A looping message appeared on every internal screen, even isolated systems. Text only. Leave. It played in every conclave language. No signal source. No origin signature. Internal security searched for leaks, viruses, code parasites. Nothing. One analyst suggested the message hadn't been inserted, it had always been there, waiting to be activated. Volcari Command ordered a show of strength. A precision orbital strike on an uninhabited human zone. The kind of display that would have sent most species into submission. The strike was clean. Thermal detonation in the upper atmosphere. No civilian targets. No visible fallout. But as the energy cleared, they saw something rise from the blast zone. Not a weapon. A structure. Hexagonal plates unfolded from the ground, absorbing the heat, redirecting light. Within moments, the terrain reverted to its original state. As if nothing had happened. The structure disappeared. The message repeated, "Leave." A week later, one of the fleet's Dreadnought-class warships was found adrift, its crew unconscious, systems wiped. In the center of the command deck, a human artifact had been placed, a primitive object, a book. Bound in synthetic leather, marked with Earth symbols. No data, no circuitry. Just ink on paper. The title, The Art of War. It was a message. Aliens began analyzing every cultural artifact humanity had ever exported. Literature. History. Military doctrine. They saw patterns they hadn't recognized before. Earth's wars weren't reactive. They were surgical. Decisive. Designed not to escalate, but to conclude. Victory wasn't measured in territory, but in surrender of will. Every engagement aimed at dismantling command structure, not armies. Every major war in human history had ended only when one side's will to continue ceased to exist. That was what Earth was targeting. One alien general remarked, "We prepared to destroy their weapons. We never considered they'd aim for our belief in victory." Humanity didn't match fleet for fleet. It never did. What it deployed were weapons that required no visibility. No spectacle. Just precision and outcome. Vessels rigged with dead space distortion fields, kinetic shadows that redirected gravity. Autonomous drones that didn't fire unless certain conditions were met, conditions triggered by thought patterns, not heat signatures. One Volcari cruiser suffered complete AI inversion. Its navigation system reversed coordinates mid-jump and reappeared in the upper thermosphere, burning on re-entry. Another tried to flee. Before it could activate jump drive, every corridor was flooded with sleep gas. Where did the gas come from? No entry points. No breach. The AI simply reported, "Environmental shift." Later analysis showed the gas had human chemical markers. Humans had found a way to place non-destructive payloads inside sealed vessels. The implication was worse than any weapon. They could already be inside every ship. Waiting. Fleet cohesion collapsed. Commanders argued. Retreat orders were proposed, denied, reproposed. Every time, the same thing happened. Someone's ship would vanish. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Just absent. Earth remained untouched. No casualties confirmed. No footage of human forces. Just outcomes. Alien morale plummeted. Even the most hardened Volcari officers began to feel it, the sense that every moment they stayed, they were playing into a plan they couldn't see. No enemy had engaged them. And yet, they were losing. Not tactically. Strategically. Psychologically. One last message was intercepted. Broadcast from somewhere within Earth's orbit. Not from a ship. From nowhere. Simple. You still think we're defending. And that was the worst realization of all. Earth hadn't been defending itself. It had been attacking the moment the first fleet entered orbit. But the battlefield wasn't space. It was belief. And they were already losing it. The moment the footage leaked, everything changed. It wasn't an official transmission. It wasn't a military broadcast. It came from a personal comms unit smuggled out by a surviving Volcari pilot and distributed across secondary networks. 17 seconds of raw feed. A Volcari cruiser twisting in on itself without contact. Crew members trying to scream in vacuum. No explosion. Just collapse. The feed ended with a soundless shatter of the bridge viewport, and then darkness. Within hours, the video spread across the galactic net. Millions watched. Then billions. The reaction was immediate. Panic in some sectors. Silence in others. And across the conclave, a single question formed. What did they wake up? Empires that once dismissed humanity began pulling archived data. Military records. Diplomatic transcripts. Cultural analysis. What they found disturbed them. The humans had engaged in over 1,000 wars across their own planet before ever achieving interstellar capability. Internal warfare spanning centuries. Tactical innovation driven by necessity, not luxury. Losses in the millions, followed by rapid adaptation. Recovery in decades, sometimes less. No pattern of stability. Only evolution. Where other species stagnated, humanity thrived on pressure. Pain sharpened them. Destruction forged their doctrine. Their most dangerous asset wasn't technology. It was how they used it, unpredictably, asymmetrically, and without hesitation once the decision was made. Academic circles lit up with urgency. Historians dug into Earth's past. The more they uncovered, the less anyone understood how this species had been overlooked. The warning signs were everywhere. The wars that had no victors, only survivors. The ideologies that had burned entire continents. The doctrines that prioritized disruption over dominance. The terrifying consistency of their will to finish what they started. The conclave summoned an emergency assembly. For the first time in centuries, all major powers attended without delegation. No proxies. No remote feeds. Just leaders and fear. The Vocari sat silent. Their military prestige was shattered. Questions flew from every angle. Why was Earth chosen for absorption? What had been missed? How many human military assets existed off-world? Had Earth ever truly complied with conclave tech-sharing agreements? They didn't have answers. Only theories. The most chilling came from a neutral observer. Humanity had never joined the conclave to cooperate. They joined to learn. Everything they shared was curated. Everything they received, they dissected. And they had been doing it for over 50 years. Quietly. Deliberately. Earth's economy, its military posture, even its cultural outreach, it was all a mask. One delegate proposed peace. Offer immediate apology, compensation, and retreat. Another delegate, from a warlike species, demanded retaliation. Full mobilization. Scorched earth. Make an example of them, he said. The chamber didn't answer. Because deep down, they all knew, Earth didn't bluff. The silence was worse than aggression. They weren't negotiating. They weren't panicking. They were waiting. Alien media began to fracture. State-run networks tried to downplay the losses. But independent channels released survivor interviews, redacted fleet memos, fragments of intercepted messages. The message was consistent. The humans didn't just repel attackers. They unmade them. Not through brute force, but with surgical precision. Every response was planned. Every countermeasure preloaded. Some species began to evacuate border colonies near Sol. Others deployed cloaked recon fleets to observe Earth. None returned. No wreckage. No signals. Just absence. The sector around Earth became a ghost zone. Charts were updated. Travel advisories issued. Then the most powerful signal yet cut through every secured conclave channel. A single human voice, speaking in galactic common: we do not seek conquest. We are not interested in diplomacy. You have crossed our line. Now you learn what that costs. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a statement of fact. A line drawn without threat or plea. Just certainty. That was when the shift happened. The conclave stopped debating whether to push forward. They started discussing containment. For the first time, they feared Earth would come for them. High Command issued a restricted directive: no further provocations. But word had already spread. Smaller empires tried to form their own pacts for protection. Mercenary fleets refused jobs near Sol. Black markets stopped trading in human tech. Entire sectors declared neutrality, not from politics, but from survival instinct. Fear moved faster than ships. Some empires tried quiet diplomacy. Coded signals. Back-channel messages. All were ignored. One message got through. Earth replied with one sentence: withdraw and be forgotten. Remain and be remembered. The deeper problem emerged then: unity fractured. Conclave members began to suspect one another. Who pushed the vote? Who covered up the early red flags? Who benefited from making Earth an enemy? Trust collapsed in whispers. Accusations flew in closed chambers. Alliances cracked under fear. Each species believed they would be Earth's next demonstration. Humanity didn't need to attack the conclave. They were watching it collapse from within. Defense budgets skyrocketed. Warships were redirected toward Sol. At least 3 empires tested new weapon systems in anticipation of escalation. But the longer they waited, the more they realized Earth hadn't moved. No retaliation. No follow-up. Just that same patient silence. The kind you hear from predators waiting for prey to make one more mistake. Admirals rewrote their threat assessments. Humans do not posture. They act. All signals indicate they have no interest in conquest. But if pressed, they will not respond, they will remove. One fleet commander, an old strategist with centuries of experience, retired with a single remark: "We have awakened something that does not need us." And in that lies the danger. Meanwhile, civilian populations across the galaxy began a cultural shift. Human art, previously mocked, became objects of fascination. Human literature, once ignored, was studied obsessively. Not for entertainment, for insight. Everyone wanted to understand the species that never screamed when attacked. The species that smiled through pain. The species that waited, always waited, until the perfect moment to end the fight. Some alien scholars theorized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't war, it was timing. They never struck first, but never struck late. They struck when it hurt most. When the message couldn't be misunderstood. The conclave still held power. But not authority. Earth hadn't broken their fleets or burned their worlds. It had done something far more dangerous. It had forced them to see themselves as prey. And now, every empire was asking the same thing, in every dark room and closed meeting. What happens if the humans stop waiting? What happens when they come? The coalition armada moved into position with confidence. 5 empires contributed ships, each believing overwhelming force would end the stalemate. Over 1,000 vessels aligned in concentric formations beyond Earth's defensive shell. Dreadnoughts, carrier arrays, autonomous kill hulls, psychic warfare barges. Nothing like it had been assembled since the Rhythan Uprising 4 centuries earlier. They called it Operation Compliance. The name implied victory was a formality. The goal wasn't conquest anymore. It was deterrence by overkill. They were wrong. Humanity didn't match posture with posture. They didn't respond at all. Earth's silence unnerved some commanders, but protocols overruled doubt. PSYOPs units beamed surrender offers toward the planet. Orbital speakers issued multilingual ultimatums. No reply. Drones dropped closer, scanning atmospheric patterns. No change. No movement. Nothing. Then a change occurred so subtle that only one fleet's AI noticed. The pattern of Earth's cloud formations shifted. Not weather manipulation. Alignment. They weren't random. They followed grid lines. Measured. Geometric. Within minutes, orbital sensors malfunctioned. Targeting arrays began returning mirrored signals. Positions scrambled. Relative distances fluctuated without movement. AI systems began recalculating gravity vectors. It made no sense. Human ships appeared without warning. Not from Earth. From the dark between worlds. Old models, decades obsolete by conclave standards. Scarred, stripped of aesthetic, built for one purpose. The coalition laughed, until the first vessel split open and released 37 subunits. Not drones. Entire subfleets, folded within the original hull. Their signatures had been hidden inside decaying space debris. Cloaked in entropy. The subunits didn't move toward the fleet. They spread outward, forming a perfect sphere around the Armada's perimeter. Then every conclave ship lost external visibility. Instruments showed stars, space, empty blackness. But cameras revealed nothing. No light. No horizon. No frame of reference. Then came the countdown. Not spoken. Not broadcast. Just numbers, printed on every fleet display simultaneously. From 10 to 1. When it hit 0, the outer ring of coalition ships went dark. Power systems failed. Life support drained. Engines silent. No explosions. Just silence. One captain tried to reboot his core system manually. It triggered an electromagnetic spike that overloaded every neural implant on board. The crew lived. But they no longer remembered their training. Just blank stares and tremors. Biological memories had been targeted. Not erased, suppressed. The inner ring panicked. Ships fired in all directions, hitting nothing. Plasma bolts and antimatter payloads drifted uselessly through space. Human vessels never engaged. They simply moved. Measured arcs. No wasted energy. Every 30 seconds, another ship went dark. Systems intact. Crews paralyzed. No hull breaches. No bodies. One ship tried to jump out of the zone. It vanished mid-jump. No exit signal. No arrival ping. It was simply gone. Scans of the surrounding region showed gravitational microtears. Tiny fractures in space itself. Human technology didn't match conclave science. It bent the rules, ignored constraints, cheated the game board. Then, one transmission emerged. This was the demonstration. That's all it said. The fleet froze. Human ships stood in absolute formation. Not advancing. Not chasing. Just holding. Daring someone to move. Back on conclave command channels, the chaos was uncontainable. High-priority lines were flooded with fragmented data and terrified requests for extraction. No strategy worked. No enemy formation could be defined. Because Earth wasn't fighting in formation. They were fighting as a distributed system. Independent units acting with shared memory. Like a neural network trained for one purpose, dismantle opposition without revealing how. Commanders realized Earth wasn't defending itself anymore. It was showing what would happen if it didn't. The coalition tried diplomacy. Broadcasts pledging retreat, asking for terms, offering ceasefire. Earth didn't respond. Instead, one Volcari battleship, the most heavily shielded in the fleet, was surrounded by 6 human craft. No weapons discharged. But within seconds, the Volcari ship's shielding inverted. Not collapsed. Inverted. Energy intended to deflect attacks now pulled them inward. The crew didn't scream. They couldn't. The vacuum took them instantly. Then, across every surviving vessel, a strange signal began to loop. Not human language. Human breath. Thousands of patterns, overlaid, multiplied, sped up. It created a pulse, a rhythm. Some AI cores translated it into binary, then code. It formed one repeating sentence: this was mercy. The command to retreat was finally given. Not voted. Not debated. Issued in desperation. But as ships tried to pull out, human vessels didn't follow. They didn't fire. They didn't chase. They simply let them leave. That terrified the coalition more than the engagement itself. One admiral, still trembling, transmitted a post-retreat statement: they didn't destroy us. They let us live. That means they know we're not a threat. Humanity had demonstrated complete tactical superiority. And restraint. They could have turned the fleet into vapor. Instead, they dismantled it. Bit by bit. Message by message. Not one conclave soldier died by direct fire. Not one human face was seen. But an entire galactic armada learned what it meant to be powerless. Earth had shifted from target to warning. And everyone was listening. The coalition's defeat didn't just signal failure. It shattered the illusion of control. Word spread faster than official reports could suppress. High-resolution combat data, classified AI debriefs, personal logs from fleet survivors, leaked across every corner of the galactic net. Billions watched ships disappear without damage. Crews immobilized without contact. A fleet undone not by fire, but by something worse: understanding. Earth hadn't reacted, it had anticipated. And more damning than the outcome was how little effort it seemed to take. That single truth pierced deeper than casualties. Humanity didn't win with superior numbers. They won by knowing how the enemy thought. Then erasing the outcome before the first shot was fired. The conclave fractured instantly. Debates turned into screaming matches. The Volcari demanded redirection of resources toward rearmament. Other empires rejected further provocation. Threats flew. Accusations of incompetence and deceit followed. Smaller species threatened to leave the alliance altogether if a second wave was launched. The vote to strike Earth had been unanimous. Now no one wanted to be tied to it. Every representative wanted someone else to blame. But no apology, no retreat, no strategic reassessment was enough to erase the fact that humanity had walked through their most coordinated military effort and left without losses. Emergency war councils split into factions. The Dominion of Atari demanded escalation, deploying forbidden technologies, ancient weapons developed during the First Galactic Wars and locked away by treaty. They claimed the only way forward was decisive force before Earth grew bolder. The Zentari Collective opposed them, arguing any further aggression would trigger a retaliation none could predict, let alone survive. They had observed Earth's conduct. It was not conquest. It was message. And if the message had been ignored once, there would not be a second warning. Volcari High Command refused to retreat from principle. Their pride was wounded, not their logic. They saw the humans not as invincible, but as unchecked. That made them dangerous. Not because of what they had done, but what they hadn't. Earth had not demanded territory, had not sought spoils, had not broadcast triumph. It was this restraint that disturbed the military elite most. An enemy who holds back does not do so from mercy. They do it because they have more to show. Debates over retaliation stalled when a Conclave security leak exposed classified internal simulations. Earth had been running predictive models on all major Conclave factions for years. Hundreds of variants, each simulating possible conflicts, diplomatic shifts, and strategic alliances. They weren't guesses. They were staggeringly accurate. One report showed a human simulation that had predicted the coalition fleet's formation, down to the approximate ship ratio, before the vote to deploy was ever passed. Earth had seen the war coming, prepared for it, designed the outcome, then watched the galaxy deliver it on schedule. It wasn't survival. It was execution. Some called for diplomacy. Quiet emissaries were proposed. No formal contact, just small neutral vessels carrying encoded requests for ceasefire and non-engagement. But human response remained identical across all attempts. Nothing. Not a refusal. Not a delay. Just absence. Earth made no move. No statement. They didn't retaliate. That was worse. Because it meant humanity had not needed to escalate. The Armada wasn't a threat. It was a lesson. Civilians across hundreds of worlds reacted before their governments did. Riots broke out in cities where soldiers had been lost. Refugees fled border systems near Seoul, afraid of the next demonstration. Conspiracy networks declared Earth had unlocked ancient AI or received assistance from higher dimensional beings. Cults emerged that worshipped human silence as divine judgment. Chaos seeped into stability. Entire sectors turned inward, focusing on defense and severing trade routes with human-aligned territories. The term human-adjacent became a diplomatic liability. Meanwhile, buried deep in Conclave intelligence archives, a new threat category was proposed: strategic apex species. Not defined by military size, but by capability to alter the strategic posture of multiple empires through singular action. Humanity was listed as the first. The only one. Some intelligence circles objected. Others accepted it without debate. One by one, the empires realized they no longer shared a common goal. The unity that had justified the first strike fractured into survival instinct. The Atari quietly repositioned fleets near their own borders. The Volcari began recruiting mercenaries to fill their shattered ranks. The Cerethi cut diplomatic ties altogether, declaring neutrality. They didn't side with Earth. They simply decided not to be noticed by them. Conclave control waned. Decision-making collapsed under paranoia. Every new message from Earth, or lack thereof, was analyzed, dissected, and speculated upon. Analysts wrote daily threat projections. Not for actions. For possibilities. Earth didn't need to move. It had become a question mark. And in a galaxy addicted to prediction, that was the worst threat imaginable. Then Earth broke the silence. A signal, short range, intercepted only by a single unmanned relay station in a distant system. Encoded. No source traceable. 4 words, translated automatically into every known language. You started this. Stop. No condition. No time limit. No demand for submission. Just clarity. And with that, the galaxy understood. Humanity would not strike unless forced. But if pushed again, there would be no warning, no demonstration, and no survivors. Earth had used a fraction of its capabilities to send a message. The second time, they wouldn't repeat themselves. Panic turned to paralysis. No fleet dared approach Sol. No council dared vote for action. Even the Vocari stopped pressing the issue. Not out of logic. Out of self-preservation. For the first time, the galaxy's dominant empires felt the weight of inferiority not in numbers, not in technology, but in intent. The most terrifying weapon Earth had wasn't a ship, a drone, or a fleet. It was conviction. And the moment they turned that fully against someone, no council, no empire, no alliance would be able to stop them. So the conclave waited. And humanity did nothing. And that was worse than war. The longer Earth remained inactive, the more dangerous it became. Every second of silence fueled speculation, dread, and internal collapse. Empires once united under banners of peacekeeping now turned inward, each suspecting the other of provoking further retaliation. Mutual defense pacts dissolved without announcements. High-level ambassadors were recalled. Border surveillance increased. Nobody trusted anyone. Earth didn't need to fire a second shot. Its message had detonated in the minds of those who once believed they held the galactic order. Now they scrambled to contain something they couldn't even see. Research institutions dedicated to human studies expanded overnight. Xenopsychologists, militarists, historians, and technologists collaborated like never before, trying to decode the human method. They mapped Earth's entire known history, looking for patterns, weakness, anything. But what emerged was a profile they didn't want to accept. Earth was inconsistent, paradoxical, volatile, but never stupid. They flirted with extinction dozens of times and still emerged stronger. They had survived climate disaster, internal warfare, economic collapse, even self-inflicted sabotage. Each cycle of near collapse resulted in technological leaps. They didn't grow despite chaos, they grew because of it. A report classified top intelligence access only concluded Earth was the only known species to weaponize uncertainty. Their doctrines weren't reactive, they were probabilistic. Every engagement was approached with the assumption of failure first. Every weapon system was designed with built-in redundancy, independent execution parameters, and autonomous fallback plans. Human forces didn't follow orders. They followed objectives. And if leadership was severed, they didn't stall. They adapted. Even the structure of their command systems was lateral, more like a neural net than a hierarchy. Take the head, the rest keeps moving. This design philosophy terrified every major power. Not because they didn't understand it, but because they couldn't replicate it. Their entire civilizations were built on structure, protocol, and obedience. Earth had thrown that out centuries ago. Authority on Earth wasn't respected by position. It was earned. Sometimes ignored. Sometimes replaced. There was no universal doctrine. No fixed moral alignment. Humans didn't act in concert. They acted in convergence. Thousands of nodes of independent chaos funneling into focused action when challenged. Worse, they had no central vulnerability. Destroy a city, they move. Cut a supply line, they reroute. Kill a leader, another steps in, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but never less committed. Their identity wasn't built on structure. It was built on motion. Any species can prepare for an enemy. But how do you prepare for one that shifts tactics every time you look away? Still, the Conclave tried to salvage the situation diplomatically. Offers of limited technological exchange were proposed. Human emissaries were invited to secret peace conferences. Every message was ignored. Not rejected, ignored. That distinction mattered. Earth wasn't signaling hostility. It was signaling indifference. And that meant they didn't see the galaxy as equal anymore. They had moved on. The war was over. Not through treaty. Through irrelevance. And that, more than fleets, broke the galaxy's spine. Independent systems began adopting Earth-aligned policies without being asked. Defensive coalitions modeled after human decentralized warfare protocols were created. Languages began integrating human terms. Earth's strategic silence became doctrine. Small powers who once begged for conclave protection now built their own defenses. Not out of confidence, but out of the understanding that the next time someone tested Earth, the consequences wouldn't be contained. No one wanted to be in the blast radius. Then came the discovery. A deep space listening post, long abandoned, picked up a directional pulse of structured noise. It wasn't a message. It was a key. When decrypted using a human cultural cipher, it unlocked a library of encoded data stored in the magnetic field of a nearby moon. The archive contained simulations. Hundreds. Each one a predictive model of galactic warfare. Not human-centered, but universal. Earth had mapped out every known species' military infrastructure and simulated collapse scenarios for each. The simulations were not from after the war. They were decades old. Earth had been preparing long before they were targeted. The implication was catastrophic. Earth never trusted the Conclave. They never intended to integrate. They joined to gather intelligence, observe weaknesses, test systems. The entire diplomatic phase had been a reconnaissance operation. Every trade, every agreement, every cultural outreach, calculated, curated, weaponized diplomacy. The Conclave scrambled to determine what Earth might still have in reserve. Some believed the humans had already deployed more assets across the galaxy. Others suspected that Earth had infiltrated communication systems, perhaps even seeded AI constructs into foreign networks. No proof surfaced. That only deepened the fear. It meant Earth had control over when and where evidence appeared. Or didn't. At the same time, Earth's public systems remained untouched. Civilian broadcasts continued. Entertainment networks functioned. Music, stories, languages, human culture flooded the galactic network not through invasion, but through curiosity. Young alien populations idolized human figures, adopted their expressions, mimicked their behavior. Galactic culture shifted without force. Earth's influence seeped in, not as conqueror, but as inevitability. Conclave leadership called this cultural corrosion. But they were too late. Earth had become the standard by which threat was measured. Not because they claimed to be, but because no one could afford to pretend otherwise. The phrase "do not provoke Earth" became law across several sectors. Not enforced by treaties, but by shared survival instinct. Even the boldest warlords backed down from anything within Sol's radius. Smugglers avoided Earthbound cargo. No pirates targeted human vessels. Not from fear of retaliation, but because none had ever returned. Military academies began teaching Earth's wars as case studies. Not as adversaries, but as reference points for the limits of strategic possibility. Earth was no longer just a species. It was a threshold. A boundary line no one dared cross again. And still, the humans said nothing. They never claimed victory. They never requested surrender. They never asked for respect. They simply returned to whatever they were doing before the war began. And that was the lesson that no simulation could teach. Earth didn't escalate. It outgrew the war. And left the galaxy behind to wonder what would happen if it ever turned back.
No retaliation came, no demand for compensation, no declaration of victory. Humanity disappeared from the conversation by choice, not absence. They shut their gates to the galactic grid, severed their feeds, and locked down every off-world relay they'd once used to communicate. Not a single transmission leaked. Not one representative reached out. Earth had declared no conditions because they no longer saw the need to. And that indifference, deeper than any insult or threat, became the axis around which the galaxy began to spiral downward. The empires that had once led the charge against humanity now faced unrest at home. Their citizens demanded answers. Why had a war been started against a species that didn't counterattack? Why had lives been thrown away against an enemy that didn't seem to care? Entire populations began to question the leadership of the Conclave. Some worlds withdrew from their respective alliances. Others staged mass resignations in military leadership. The few surviving veterans of the failed campaign were treated as cursed, haunted by what they saw, yet unable to explain it. Their stories sounded impossible, their trauma unprovable, but they were all the same. Not tales of death, but of helplessness. Trade networks that once passed through Earth systems had to be rerouted. Planets that relied on human-engineered logistics were forced to build outdated alternatives. Industrial sectors slowed. Research programs stalled. Earth hadn't attacked the galactic economy. It simply stopped participating. And with that, hundreds of supply lines frayed and broke. Conclave dependency had been subtle, masked in the name of progress. Now, stripped of human efficiency, the true scale of reliance came into full view. The Volcari suffered worst. As the initiators of the original strike, they had lost more than ships. They had lost credibility. Their colonies rioted. Their enemies saw weakness. 2 border worlds declared independence, citing the failed war and demanding neutrality from any alliance that might one day provoke humanity again. The Volcari responded with force, and within days, their military movements were jammed by invisible interference. Communications failed. Navigation glitched. And for the first time since the war, Earth reappeared, not through weapons but through silence. The interference ceased the moment the Volcari retreated. It was a warning. No shots fired. No words spoken. No demands issued. Just the reminder that Earth was still watching. Other nations took notice. Governments began issuing unofficial policies titled, "Containment Through Distance." These weren't military operations. They were precautions. Instructions for avoiding any proximity to human systems. Blacklisted zones grew around Earth's sphere of influence. Not to punish them but to avoid them. A void formed at the center of the galaxy, where one blue planet and its silence dictated the movement of every empire without needing to move itself. That silence began to mutate. First it was fear, then curiosity, and awe. The younger generations, removed from the humiliation of the war, grew fascinated. Human culture surged. Art, literature, digital archives. They pored over every piece of humanity that had made its way across the stars before Earth cut the cord. Forums dissected human films and historical battles. AI hosts built educational simulations replicating Earth's martial philosophies. What started as a failed war transformed into an interstellar obsession. The conclave tried to shut it down. Legislation was drafted to ban the propagation of human media. Backfired. Streisand effect. Within days, black markets overflowed with Earth content. Pirates encoded entire libraries into sublight microprobes and fired them into independent systems. The more they tried to bury Earth, the more Earth became the foundation. Then came the anomaly. A deep space probe, launched centuries ago by humanity, resurfaced at the edge of a mining system in the Dorlith region. Its trajectory was linear. Its contents benign. A golden disk. Instructions on how to decode its message. It contained greetings in dozens of human languages, mathematical diagrams, and samples of human music. It wasn't a weapon. It was an echo from the past, a gesture of friendship. But now, after the war, the message was reinterpreted. Not as an invitation, as a warning. One track in particular, the audio waveform of human laughter, circulated faster than any other. To most species, laughter was a display of triumph. Mockery. Regret. They didn't understand it the way humans did. They didn't recognize it as joy, resilience, survival. They only saw it as the sound made by a species that had been underestimated. One empire, the Karate Syndicate, decided to test the boundaries. A small scout fleet was sent toward the outermost human beacon. Not hostile, just investigative. They never reached it. The last message from the fleet wasn't a distress call. It was a data dump. Hours of hallucination reports, recursive thought loops in AI cores, memory decay. The crews claimed to see things that weren't there. Hear words in their own voice. Systems rebooted into languages the operators didn't know. When the message ended, the fleet's transponder signatures vanished. No wreckage. No emergency signal. Just silence again. Another message appeared days later, untraceable in origin. Consent is not required. Presence is violation. Galactic maps were redrawn. Earth's boundary expanded by interpretation alone. No human ships were seen. No diplomats arrived. But the galaxy adjusted itself around the threat of proximity. Not because Earth declared borders, but because no one wanted to find out what crossing them meant. In the absence of engagement, Earth became a myth. Not forgotten, feared. Not glorified, respected. The galaxy hadn't lost a war. It had survived a demonstration. And the fear wasn't of the humans who fought. It was of the humans who didn't need to.
Power shifts in the galaxy always happened with visible signs. Battles, coups, declarations. But the change humanity caused left no debris, no occupation, no celebration. Just a ripple that never stopped expanding. Former superpowers that once measured strength by fleet tonnage and colony count were now stuck watching charts with blank zones around Earth. Political analysts stopped asking what Earth might do. The new question was, how far would the fear reach before it broke something else? Entire generations began growing up under the shadow of the silent power. Children on planets that had never seen Earth or humans were taught not to interfere, not to provoke, not to assume safety in numbers. A human didn't need to be present for their influence to alter the mood in a room. Their absence had weight. The warning had permeated beyond language. It was instinct now. Predatory silence didn't need repeating. Small factions formed around Earth's example. Not to imitate but to survive. Decentralized command. Obfuscated tech development. Strategic ambiguity. Do not be predictable, became the unofficial doctrine of independent border systems. The closer a world was to Earth's old trade corridors, the more it adjusted its posture, not out of alliance, but out of the understanding that Earth would not warn twice. Internal security agencies across several empires began failing, not from hacking but from internal collapse. Personnel refused to act on orders that might risk provoking Earth again. Agents defected. Military officers faked data to avoid escalation. Fear had become a virus. It infiltrated policy, undermined protocol. Leaders no longer asked, "Can we?" They asked, "Will Earth see this?" In a desperate attempt to restore influence, the Conclave attempted to launch a new initiative. Operation Renewal. A staged demonstration of unity among the major species. Grand parades, technology showcases, military flyovers. Earth wasn't invited. That was the point. The display was supposed to reframe the narrative. Remind the galaxy of who still held power. But the spectacle collapsed mid-transmission. Not through sabotage, through comparison. As soon as the operation went public, millions began uploading human equivalents. Real wars. Real innovations. Real victories. No staged parades. No artificially inflated statistics. Just history raw and terrifying. A side-by-side display of spectacle versus substance. The effort to restore pride only deepened the humiliation. Conclave authority dropped to its lowest in centuries. The last standing empires faced revolt not through violence, but through indifference. Tax refusals. Draft dodging. Cultural disengagement. Civilians weren't resisting authority. They were ignoring it. Leadership tried to reassert relevance, but no one cared. Earth had demonstrated the true nature of authority. If it must be demanded, it's already lost. Quietly, Earth resumed interstellar trade. Not through open declarations, but through anonymous proxies. Cargo marked with untraceable stamps. Tech embedded with undecipherable source code. The products worked better, lasted longer, and spread faster than anything else on the market. Nobody could prove they came from Earth. But everyone knew. Demand exploded. The black market bent around their silent re-entry. Whole economies shifted again, toward the gravity of a species that never asked to lead, but could not be ignored. Academic institutions altered their curricula. Galactic history was restructured. Earth's campaign wasn't listed as a war. It was called the Turning. A new era designation followed. Not numbered, not categorized. Just marked by the absence of conflict with humanity. Peace through threat became a permanent fixture of geopolitical strategy. The Volcari, stripped of influence and global standing, attempted to rebrand their legacy. Museums were built showing pre-conflict achievements. But even those exhibits had to acknowledge the moment their dominance ended. One of their own historians wrote the definitive summary. "We thought we found a lesser species. What we discovered was the blueprint for our obsolescence." The remaining great powers began adopting quiet compliance. No public tribute. No military subservience. Just deference. A shared policy of never crossing Earth's path again. Not because they feared retaliation, but because they doubted they'd see it coming. The last psychological analysis commissioned by the conclave was never published. It circulated in fragments, leaked by an anonymous insider. It stated clearly, Earth had no intention to rule, conquer, or expand. They had simply prepared for the worst, and when the worst arrived, responded so completely that the event could not be repeated. The final line of that report was simple. The only victory Earth ever required was not needing to fight again. Diplomats tried one last time. Not official envoys. Just volunteers. Former allies. Students. Researchers. Pilots who'd traded with Earth before the war. They sent messages not of surrender, not of guilt, but of honesty. They asked what Earth wanted. The response came months later. No video. No ambassador. Just a statement delivered through a civilian comnet, embedded in an old cargo manifest. We want nothing from you. We just won't be tested. That message once again reset the board. Empires collapsed inward. Not from attack, but from self-inflicted doubt. Their entire political structures had been built around the concept of leverage. Earth had no leverage. They didn't bargain. They didn't take. They didn't reply. And in a galaxy obsessed with control, nothing was more terrifying than the entity that didn't need it. Humanity remained still, which meant they were always ready. Galactic Year 0001, PT. Post-turning. The calendar itself had been rewritten, not by force, not by mandate, but because the event that reset everything had no better name. Across thousands of systems, bureaucracies stamped documents, updated logs, rebuilt infrastructure, all under a date that acknowledged the moment Earth stopped being one world among many. They didn't sign a treaty, didn't demand recognition. But everyone adjusted their clocks anyway. It wasn't homage. It was gravity. You aligned with what couldn't be moved. There were no more fleets dispatched to Sol. No reconnaissance missions. No covert AI infiltration. Not because it was forbidden, but because no one believed they'd return. Earth had become a strategic black hole. Information entered but didn't escape. Assumptions collapsed within its boundary. Every attempt to predict their next move returned null. That wasn't strategy anymore. It was environment. Every power still functioning rewrote doctrine. War was no longer defined by firepower, numbers, or reach. It was defined by consequence. Earth had revealed that the true measure of strength was not in what you could do, but what others dared not do in your presence. And nobody dared anymore. The galaxy didn't fear humans because of what they destroyed. It feared them because of what they'd chosen not to. It wasn't dominance. It was disinterest. That's what made it permanent. The greatest remaining minds focused on a single pursuit, understanding how they missed it. 50 years of peaceful contact. 50 years of trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange. Earth had played their role so flawlessly that no one questioned their compliance. They weren't hostile. They were helpful, curious, cooperative. It wasn't deception. It was preparation. The conclave hadn't been tricked. They'd been studied. Every question returned to that. Why didn't humanity warn them? The answer, eventually, was found buried in human philosophy. Ancient texts. Pre-spaceflight writings. One concept repeated again and again. Deterrence through consequence, not threat. Humans didn't shout. They waited. Not because they were patient, but because patience is the deadliest form of confidence. They didn't have to prove capability. They let others assume absence until it was too late. And once shown, that capability never had to be demonstrated again. By now, new political movements had formed, not to confront Earth, but to protect their worlds from the kind of cultural erosion Earth unintentionally triggered. Entire governments collapsed under the pressure of irrelevance. Not because Earth demanded loyalty, but because their example made most existing systems feel obsolete. If one planet could prepare for a galactic war alone, survive it, and return to silence, what excuse did anyone else have? Empires that had stood for centuries began copying the structure of human resilience. Layered autonomy, contingency training, civilian integration into security infrastructure. Not one centralized fleet, but millions of small redundant systems. The idea wasn't to match Earth. That was impossible. The goal was to avoid being noticed. Earth had become a passive test. If your civilization could function without threatening them, they wouldn't care. If you pushed them again, they wouldn't ask why. And that was the final shift. The conclave didn't dissolve formally. Simply stopped mattering. No central council. No unified vote. What remained was a loose network of diplomatic channels too afraid to admit that the most powerful force in the galaxy never attended their meetings. Their resolutions didn't affect Earth. And if they didn't affect Earth, they didn't matter. The only functioning political entity of any consequence became the Silence Protocols, voluntary codes adopted by hundreds of species that explicitly prohibited engagement with, approach toward, or analysis of Earth systems without majority consensus from local populations. Not a rule enforced by Earth. A doctrine enforced by everyone else out of raw, systemic fear. Even that wasn't enough for some. A few ultra-isolationist factions tried to seal off their civilizations completely. They created shadow networks, false coordinates, signal dampening grids. But it was already too late. The turning hadn't been military. Had been mimetic. Human thought, philosophy, language. It had infected the galactic mind. You didn't need to encounter a human to think like one. You just needed to fear what they might do. In that fear, humanity achieved what no empire had. Absolute stability. And Earth did what it always did after war. Rebuilt. There were no public statements. No victory celebrations. No shift in policy. Just progress. Quiet. Steady. Civilizational momentum directed inward. While the galaxy obsessed over predictions and protocols, Earth focused on life. On research. On medicine. On art. On exploration beyond mapped sectors. While other species watched the stars with dread, humanity looked past them. They had already won the war. Now they were finished with it. There were whispers that Earth had launched new vessels. Not warships. Observation platforms. Deep-range explorers. Slow-burning generational arcs. Not escaping. Not expanding. Just moving forward. Without permission. Without oversight. The galaxy had stopped asking what came next. Because it no longer had the right to ask. In time, Earth faded from day-to-day thought. Not forgotten, just set apart. The same way primitive species once looked at stars they couldn't reach. Aware something was there, powerful and untouchable. The new generation grew up never hearing Earth make a demand. Never seeing a human face. Only knowing that once, the entire galaxy misjudged them. And never got a second chance. The last universal law written, across more than 500 star systems, was a simple one. If they ever speak again, listen. Because if they don't, you won't get to.